Hello, everyone. Welcome to Maddox Digital Plus Customer Success Summit. You are currently watching Laying the Foundation for Scalable Digital Success, Start with Contact Management. I'm excited to introduce our speaker, and as I introduce them, I'm going to have them answer our icebreaker question, what is your biggest digital addiction? Please welcome Zach Siegert, Senior Manager of Digital Customer Success at Abnormal Security.
Thanks, Hisham. Hey, everybody. Zach Seard here. Looking forward to speaking with you all and sharing some of my learnings. So, Hisham, do you want me to answer that digital addiction question now?
Yes, please.
All right. So, I have kind of been off the social media game for a while, aside from LinkedIn, but the biggest replacement, which is a form of social media, more of a sub pocket, has been Strava. Love the map component, love seeing and being inspired by friends and how much they're working out and getting outdoors. So Strava is definitely where I spend majority of my digital screen time for personal use. All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in. So as Hisham mentioned, Zach Siegert, Senior Manager of Digital CS. I've been working in CS for about a decade and specifically within digital or scaled CS for the last 4 to 5 years. And I've really kind of understood at each organization that I've been with that data is the foundational element, and particularly contact data. And so I'd like to start with a poll question for the audience. So, Sham, if you can go ahead and ask that poll question. Curious for all of you who are kind of digital CS practitioners, what's the current state or scent of contact hygiene at your organization? So specifically, think about how you're managing your customer contacts as they come over from sales. Is that data accurate? Is it a robust set of data? You have all the meaningful metadata on that. So go ahead and provide your response there. We'll give it another few seconds. We'll see if we can get anybody with heavenly aromas for contact hygiene data, although I'm suspect of that. All right, Hisham, you can go ahead and end that and share the results out with the group if you don't mind. All right, so decent chunk at Putrid, some at Musty, many in Odorless, and we did get one in Heavenly. So curious to connect with that person afterwards and understand what they were able to do to improve the scent of contact hygiene. So as we proceed here, I asked kind of ChatGPT to help support and create this image, and it came back with this incredible masterpiece of what contact hygiene may look like in a typical organization if it's stinky. One key call out that it made is, there's often kind of some incorrect spellings with AI image generation, and it shared that it is stanky. And so I thought stanky was a very applicable word for the state of contact hygiene in the organizations that I've worked in and what I hear from my peers. And so today I want to really share about the success we've had in order to draw awareness and attention to that, and then ensure it's leadership priority so that our team, in collaboration with other teams across go-to-market and operations, can improve our contact hygiene, which ultimately will improve our digital CS capabilities and our entire customer journey. So as we proceed to the next slide, I think we've all heard kind of this old marketing adage, and hear it often within the digital CS lens of, do you have the right person with the right message at the right time? What I've found is many teams are spending their time kind of fine-tuning the message and thinking about, well, what if it's worded that way? And how about we try this? And then throwing it into AI and making it more concise, or making it more like asking ChatGPT to elaborate on that. And then often you're doing some testing on, is it the right time? Should I send at 8 a.m. on Tuesday, or should I wait until 11? What about like a surprise and sending an email on Friday afternoon? Or what about a different time within their journey? And so all of those are kind of important factors to consider, but they're downstream of really what's critical here and what's listed first. So from a priority standpoint, who is the right person that you're trying to reach out to? And so kind of narrowing in on, do we have the right people? And then are there a sufficient number of key contacts or appropriate contacts at our customer is super critical. I've seen with many organizations where, you may have 1,000 customers, and when you think about, well, how many key contacts do we have? 500 or 1,000. And so what we can really do on the digital CS side is lay that foundation to become multi-threaded, and ensure that everyone has that strong experience with your platform, seeing the value from it, as you get them engaged from a digital component. So I'm going to transition into kind of how I was able to translate this problem and the opportunity here into something that really caught the eye of our executives, of our fellow operations team members at Abnormal, and we were able to, then prioritize this work. So to start, we wanted to really increase the reach that we had. So instead of 1,000 customer contacts, we wanted to reach 10,000. That'll support me in all of my efforts to drive further adoption, to increase engagement at events, and so forth. But I'd been banging that drum for a while, and it was falling on deaf ears of like, okay, great, but this this is helping digital CS. This isn't really a full org problem. And where I was able to have a ton of success was, let's think about this, more from a lens of the commercial component, and how can we convey that to our go-to-market leadership team that we've got a problem within our customer install base, and if we don't solve it now, it'll have impacts on retention. So we'll see a spike in churn. And what we introduced was the notion of contact coverage rates. So the first one that I'll share about is the key contact coverage rate. And this can be defined differently depending on your org. You may follow a methodology from a sales perspective like MEDDIC, or another, and you have clear definitions of key contacts. You may have partnered closely with your marketing team, and these personas need to be captured. And so each organization's a little different. I'll get into kind of some of those details on what my recommendations are for key contacts. But globally, kind of what are those key roles or key personas, and how many of those, how many accounts have somebody within that kind of value within that role identified? And then you can share that percentage. Hopefully that's a bit higher. Hopefully you don't have many accounts with nobody, no contacts there. I know it can occur, especially when you sell to smaller organizations and that person leaves, and then it's like you're scrambling to find who. But that is a critical component to say, okay, we're at 60% or we're at 80%. What can we do as an organization to ensure we have 100% coverage in our accounts of key contacts? Now, if we're going a layer deeper, for us, the MEDDIC methodology is kind of how we operate on the sales side. So that same type of language, speaking across go-to-market with the same language was really critical in persuading and conveying the opportunity here. Breaking it down into economic buyer and then champion. So for an economic buyer, what is our coverage rate? How many of those important decision makers, those folks who hold the purse strings at your customer accounts, do we have identified in our CRM, with accurate data? And then we can start to measure engagement. But it first starts with, do we know who they are? And is that kind of known within our CRM? I think that's impactful when you can say, look, we have 30% or even 60%. Any executive is going to want 95 to 100% of those final EBs identified within their CRMs. The final piece is champion. Champion is so critical. I know many of us in the CS world have the strongest relationships with our champions. There's scenarios we can have more than one champion, but definitely having high rate of champion coverage is helpful. And so presenting my metrics in this fashion as it related to contact management really did catch the eye and the attention of our leadership team, and ensure that we appropriately invested this quarter to address this and increase those percentages. So as we think about, okay, rolling this out, I want to ensure that Everyone understands the importance of standardization across your go-to-market org, as well as streamlining where possible. And so I'm sure many of you have been on a CS team and said, oh, well, who's your executive sponsor? Who's your decision maker? Who's your economic buyer? And kind of that definition varies based off of who you speak to. So to start kind of foundational to standardize those definitions and standardize which roles you're going to capture. My recommendation is to streamline this, make it 3 to 5 roles. Don't try to have like 8 different roles and we're going to have all these unique scenarios. It's like you're going to build too complex of a system to make any progress. So start with 2 or 3 and say, this is really what matters and this is what we need to focus on. I see some organizations saying like, okay, we're going to start tracking procurement and we're going to start tracking like technical stakeholder from this point of view, from this department, depending on like your application. And it's just a bit too complicated to really scale. So here are the definitions as an example of what you could use. And these are the 3 that I would recommend kind of honing in on. And so now where can you find this data? I think that's where, you kind of lay a good foundation, you have a solid framework in place, you're starting to report on it, but you need more data and you need it now because all of this is kind of a precursor to actually executing any sort of digital-led motion. So my first recommendation, probably the most challenging one, paddling upstream. How can you go and work with your sales ops and rev ops partners, ultimately sales leadership, and ensure that they're adhering to and have required fields and are identifying these individuals. That can be, really challenging in political conversations, and it may take months or years to build those relationships and do that. But that's going to be so critical, kind of plug the leak upstream and ensure that you solve the problem there. But while you're kind of fighting that angle and pursuing that, getting to know, that the people in that role, start to use the quote unquote CS data. Use what's at your disposal. So, what type of contact data do you have today? Do you run an academy and you have some course completion data? Do you have community data? Are you able to partner with your engineering and product team and get access to some product usage data that has contact records and you can expose who all your admins are, and then start to dig into the spreadsheets deep within Google Drive. I'm sure there are like your stellar CSMs who are monitoring who's who within their organizations, and they've mapped that out in slide decks or spreadsheets, and it may be a bit laborious, but start to mine that data. The final thing that I think is helpful is really collaborating with the CSMs and asking them to do a blitz and identify these and kind of showcase the impact of, hey, here is when customers are engaged with us digitally. Here's the impact it can have on retention. Here's the type of events or campaigns that we're going to run. This is the time savings that you'll realize. But in order to bring all this to life, we need that right person who's going to receive the message. So I recommend kind of getting with your CS leadership team. Maybe it's a pizza lunch, maybe it's everybody's on a Zoom on a Friday morning or Friday afternoon, but definitely work to increase those coverage rates. And that'll be huge to show the impact on contact hygiene. All right. And so once you've got some of that data in place, you want to start to bring this digital customer journey to life. And so we've got some, particular flows. Start to think about what is the highest priority and the biggest impact for your team. I think starting with onboarding is what I would always recommend because often you can trust the data there that it is accurate. You're not going to get an email bounce, and start building some welcome flows. And then you can see my emojis here. Tailor it first to your champion. Think about their experience and what that digital journey looks like for a champion, and then extend it to your executive sponsor and economic buyer. Or, hone in on the admin experience. That's often kind of the largest number of users, and you may have that data readily available. So that cat typing, engage with the admins. You'll also start to, gain kind of access to champions and economic buyers through that admin avenue. And then explore different channels. I think contact data is leveraged primarily in an email context. But it's important to think about how you can use your other channels to bolster your contact data, whether that's via an in-portal, notification asking a customer to provide some, answers to questions that will really make them have more attributes on their record, a bit more about what department they're in, what their goals are going to be, and so forth. And then the final piece is really the stage in the journey. So, like I said, I recommend kind of the onboarding stage to begin, just because you can trust the data there, and that kind of sets really the standard for what that digital led experience will look like. But you're often kind of thinking about digital CS when the product and the organization has already grown to a certain threshold. And so you don't want to just like disregard any of your quote unquote legacy customers, your existing customers. Think about kind of what type of outreach can we do to those customers, or can we enroll them in an ongoing journey? Maybe it's welcoming new admins who join those accounts. That's a great way to start, and data that's often available to operations teams. All right, so proceeding here, and then I know I've seen some good questions come through and some commentary in the chat, so we'll have definitely an opportunity to go through those. But really, the takeaways here are like it's so foundational to run a digital CS program if you have strong contacts and strong contact hygiene. You don't want to be reaching out to a fraction of your customers. You want to be reaching out to the right person and the right persona, and then kind of layer in, is it the right message and is it the right time? And so what I recommend, Peter Drucker's famous saying of like, you can't manage what you don't measure, is start to measure these coverage rates. That really helped me to gain buy-in from leadership and say, wait a minute, we've got a glaring problem here. We can't possibly go into a renewal not knowing who our economic buyers are and not knowing who our champions are. Well, all that effort to increase those coverage rates, that's going to support everything that I do downstream with digital programs. Next, standardize those role definitions. This one can be tough. I recommend kind of going and having a breakfast if you're in person, or sending a virtual lunch to your enablement team, the sales enablement team. I think they've been like really good partners for me in the past of kind of controlling the narrative on what do we inform the sales team of, and then how does that flow into operations. And so if they kind of get this and see the need for standardizing the role definitions and streamlining them, that can help you make some progress and start to push this big boulder. And then on the digital customer journey slide, I think you've heard it from some other wonderful speakers today, is, start small and iterate. You're not going to build a complex journey, across stages for every persona, for every segment tomorrow. Like that's going to take some time. And so begin those efforts, and ultimately like that'll allow you to multi-thread. And so when a deal closes and you have a champion that's come through, but there's 3 or 4 people involved with the implementation of your tool, make sure all of those, like you've got a mechanism in place to capture all of those contacts, and they're all going to be engaged digitally out the gate. And then you'll be multi-threaded. And that way, when the champion gets a new role or they retire, you know exactly who is your next person to potentially replace. And your team can go and build that relationship and foster it there. So, we're all like in this digital journey together, I think, within CS, and it's been phenomenal to see the community here. So stay in touch and share your learnings. Kind of definitely let me know what's worked well for you, where you're having challenges. I like to kind of be involved in the DCS Connect Slack workspace, and then these types of events are always great to learn from my peers and to share exactly what I've learned from a tactical standpoint. So that wraps it up, Hisham. I know some questions are coming through. I'll take a peek at those now.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a few questions in, and if anyone else has any others, feel free to drop them in the chat. But Zach, the first question for you, are there contacts that are not economic buyers or champions, but still considered key contacts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say this kind of depends on your org. From a commercial standpoint, there's absolutely additional kind of executive sponsors or maybe a technical buyer who you might want to introduce. But from a practical standpoint, like who are your users? There may be different key contacts that are really like powerful for you to monitor. And so I'd say within the context of your application, your product, the service that you provide, think about beyond your quote unquote like historic commercial decision makers, who else is really important? I know from experience, like Gainsight really has focused on their admins and that admin journey in the past couple of years. And that's made like a huge difference in my experience running some digital CS programs through Gainsight, and definitely built me as a champion for them. Even though, over the past few years, I wasn't the champion of the tool, or the economic buyer, but that experience helped to bolster kind of my understanding of the capabilities and the value of Gainsight.
Next question for you is how do you manage when CSMs and sales identify different people for different roles? This person uses Salesforce for sales and Gainsight for success.
Another great question. Go-to-market alignment is so critical. I know every organization is structured a bit differently. I would say first start with like, here are the roles, and these are not roles specific to CS. We kind of had to, fall a bit on like what we thought the right roles were for CS and conform to sales. But that's, part of being in a revenue generating for-profit business is like you want to be aligned from a commercial standpoint. And so my recommendation is conform as much as you're willing to sales definitions. Maybe fine tune them a bit for your needs on the CS side, and then ensure that you're identifying the same people. From a system standpoint, we also use Salesforce and Gainsight. There's opportunity to integrate those, and there's write backs between the contacts. So our CSMs are managing their customer contacts in Gainsight, but the AEs are doing it in Salesforce. And those integrate with a bidirectional sync back and forth so that they're updated accordingly. And our CSMs don't have to then go into Salesforce, into a tool that they're not as much of an expert in.
Okay, I have a nice three-part question for you. Do you take on owning contact maintenance? How do you collaborate with sales ops if they're owning more pre-sales contacts? And how do you coordinate systems between the two?
That is a great question. I think in my years in digital CS, I have kind of become the spokesperson of contact management and contact hygiene. And subsequently, I've had to own this narrative and this initiative. It's not sexy, it is painful, but it's so beneficial. And so the maintenance piece, I think, was a specific question. Ideally, you're kind of advocating for how you're going to manage, and then you're setting up tooling and systems to do maintenance. So there's some interesting tools on the market to track, whether or not a contact has left, like user gems or Champify. And then you can also use potentially your platform data for that. And so building in some more scalable systems of monitoring who's who, I think is really helpful for the maintenance. Collaborating with sales ops, like more pre-sales contacts. Pre-sales contacts from my point of view are just like about to become customers. And so those are going to be customer contacts, and important people right when you transition and close the deal. Now, there's probably a version of that where it's like a procurement contact, and maybe they're not as critical to have a digital journey for and identified. And so we definitely focus in on like who is still going to be involved with the tool. So those EBs and the champions. And I think the final question is like, how do you coordinate systems between the two? I think I spoke to like how we've set it up with Salesforce and Gainsight, but then ultimately layering on additional tooling and process to do the full management suite. And it's something that we're still rolling out and kind of designing, but we understand now that it is important. Leadership gets it based off coverage rates, and we're designing that system that's really going to bring us into the next few years and unlock so much scale for us as a team.
One other question for you, Zach. How can we ensure that our outreach efforts are reaching the right personas at the right time?
That is a great question there. So I think in evaluating outreach, kind of dependent on channel, you'll have different um, results and data available to view whether or not there was engagement. So when doing in portal, if you're using Appendo or Gainsight PX or, you know, Chameleon or another tool, there's often analytics into the views and the clicks. And so that's a good way to understand like, are we reaching the right person at the right time? Is did they engage? And then ultimately, like, did they convert? If you had a clear call to action within your outreach, like, was that action? Was there an impact on adoption? If you're seeing high conversion with a certain type of outreach in a particular channel, try another type of outreach within that same channel. And it really is a game of experimentation and learning from your CSMs and your internal stakeholders and learning from your customers. I think that's what's for me so enjoyable about digital CS is you're always fine tuning and evaluating the data and saying, well, what worked well for us in the past? And then how can we go in and experiment, an A/B test here or pilot this particular new idea and constantly evaluating, are we reaching the right person at the right time? And then evolving that as you go.
Awesome. There are no more questions, but a few interesting comments maybe you'd like to hear and comment on. Connecting your project to business objectives and you get traction. You can see how it's related, but others in GTM team don't necessarily know it. Reframe it so it gets prioritized. And then also clean contact data is the foundation for everything.
All right. You and I would do well on an airplane together, chatting about kind of aligning business objectives to your ultimate goals and then getting back to, okay, well, what's the problem at hand? So I'm just now opening the chat and seeing some familiar names there. So appreciate the engagement and the reinforcement. I hope that the group here have some good takeaways and can really roll out this notion of coverage rates. That's be my first recommendation is start to measure that. Work with your ops team, or if you're capable of it today, start to measure your percentage coverage for champion and economic buyer. You'll really have some interesting listeners there on that output, and you can start to do some great analysis to say, okay, when we had an economic buyer identified, our renewal rates were X. When we didn't have an economic buyer identified, our renewal rates were Y. Guaranteed, those renewal rates when you don't have key contacts identified will be less. And that cohort analysis is another great way to kind of drive this narrative and create a compelling message to your executives.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. There are no more questions. So with that, we are at the end of our session. The recording of this session will be available early next week in our resource hub, and all summit attendees will be notified when the resource hub is live. Thank you again to our wonderful speaker for joining us today, and thank you to everyone else for attending.
Thanks, Asham. Thanks to everybody for the engagement. Definitely connect via the Digital CS Slack Connect group.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.